Thank you all for joining. Welcome to our third and final SOC Talk. I'm Anna Soslova. I'm on the field marketing team. Today, our solution architect, Sanat Chugh, will cover how to respond to the damage if an attacker manages to get into your organization's environment. Before we get started, I wanted to remind everyone that if you have any questions for Sanat throughout the webinar, you can ask them in the chat. If he doesn't get to your question at the end, we'll follow up via email within 24 hours. Now over to you, Sanat.
Thank you, Anna. Hey guys, and welcome to the third part of our SOC Talk series. Today I'm primarily going to be focusing on the response side of things, mainly trying to achieve incident response in terms of how do you prepare for it, what does a good detection look like, a little bit of the analysis that you perform, and how do you recover from an incident. Now, while these topics seem pretty broad over here in the agenda, it is not structured that way. It's primarily focusing on the analyze part and the prepare part that I feel are essential to being in a good incident response process. At the end of the day, when you look at this process, it's primarily, I look at it from a repetitive cycle manner, if you may, as you've seen with many incident response process. It's a complete circle, right? You prepare for it, you get an alert for something going on, you analyze, you try to figure out how do I contain it, and then how do I even put an end to it. After that, you try to recover, you try to bring business operations back to normal, and then it goes back to the lessons learned and adding that to your preparation process. So going a little deeper into each of these steps over here, what is the preparation and how do I see it? Essentially, the goal is to perform risk remediation, right? You don't want exposure. You want to cover up the gaps that are there in your security profile so that you're prepared in case of an incident. It covers the whole design and development process of an incident response. You cover aspects of the organization, users, processes, procedures, all of that. A good thing to keep in mind during this phase of preparation is vulnerability assessments. It's awesome to be in a position where you know what, where, and how you're vulnerable. So you performing some kind of vulnerability assessment is always a must. Just to understand, maybe even am I vulnerable to this on this server for this version of this software? Can be anything that you're looking out for. Could be any vector. Today, when you consider attacks, they're always undefined in their nature and their path. It's not easy to say, oh, this is exactly what is going to happen next. Or even for that matter, how the infection is going to happen. When you think of one of the attacks I read a couple of months ago that happened in Las Vegas where a casino was stolen, it happened through the aquarium. So there are different vectors that you have to keep in mind, IoT related, mobile related, endpoint related, that help you analyze the situation and achieve this low risk scenario. So keeping that in mind, I know the slide is text heavy, but the idea being you want to think about how you're structuring it, right? The preparation, the different kind of questions you want to ask. What I have over here is a few little pointers that I feel are kind of important or essential that you should go through. You know, create your top 10 list. So the first one in that, what I mean by that is not only top 10 for every category included. What I mean by category is users or network related or endpoint related. You can have a top 10 questions for, say, a process at the end of the day. I see Skype run. I want to check the version. I want to see who's the guy running it. Does it have any parents? Does it have any child? So essentially, that way you're landing up in a situation where you're trying to improve your efficiency while the incident happens. You're trying to see and cut out the various paths that an attacker could take or the various options that could lead to black holes, if you may, where you go down the path trying to find something that is not essential. understanding your network, learning a little bit about the softwares the company uses. Different companies have different sets of softwares, and you want to see that at the end of the day, whether it's in your SIM or your EDR tool, you're able to firstly have visibility into it. So you're able to first understand that these are the different kind of softwares we use. These are the kind of vulnerabilities we know. Are we on the latest patch version? Having that visibility is key in this scenario. So when we talk a little bit going deeper down the slide into crown jewels, what I like to call those, I call them crown jewels essentially because those are the most critical, right? I'm sure you've come across this term in the past. Having a deep and robust understanding of what is going on with the most important assets in your organization is where I say you would want to start. Obviously, it doesn't mean that's the only place you stop. You keep going. You find every possible way your crown gel could interact via the network, via a user, just to try and see what are the possible ways I could be exploited. Eventually, you want to be at a stage where you have some sort of playbook that tells you, okay, I've seen this incident, and these are the next steps I have to take. Step number one could be the first point in the slide, which is just answering those 10 questions. Might be, oh, I've seen a credential theft. It's a pretty severe alert. Send out an email immediately to my SOC manager or to a higher up who can approve me isolating this machine. So those are some of the playbooks you create. You can do that creating your own tools, but considering we're living in a world where automation is getting better and better, you always have SOARs like your Domestos, your Phantoms that can do that for you. So those are great ideas to go about preparing your incident response plan. Let's go a little deeper into this. So what I bring up next is a technique I saw to try and understand your threat exposure in a way. Involving your red team is always a great idea in building out your preparation phase, right? You want them to pen test to try and see, because at the end of the day, the report from a vulnerability assessment is very different compared to a report from a red team. When you have the actual exploits being used on the boxes, you tend to realize what gaps are there in your assessment. At the end of the day, even when you go and look for all the exploits, say on a Windows 7 Service Pack 1, for example, it's hard to realize what is passed and what is not. And automated red team adversaries help do this. So there are tools like, for example, you can use Caldera, which is created by MITRE, or you could use APT simulation tools. But while using these red team tools, you want to keep in mind two things. Firstly, that they're sophisticated enough to give you the option to pivot, like a real rat, something like a Cobalt Strike that is happening live process based. And you want to ensure that it's not considered as a point test. What I mean by a point test is that you're not just testing on that one box, it's across an lab environment, for example, that you created, that you're replicating, right? So red teaming is important according to me in the preparation phase. But how do you use those results? How do you map them? I came across this matrix that MITRE has created called threat susceptibility. The idea being you run an attack and then you score it. You say this TTP was blocked, so the risk is pretty low. This one went straight right through and I could do so much more, so this is pretty high risk, right? It's essentially trying to create that assessment chart that you can refer to and say, this is where I could probably be exploited, or this is where I can be fine. So using this image I saw from the source of MITRE itself, you can see an example over here. And I really like it. If you think about it, it's basically assigning a score of risk. You have your assets and you're trying to understand whether it's external, internal, or a trusted insider. What does that look like? On the left, you have your TTP ID. So you can definitely use this and refer to the MITRE technique then, or use the MITRE matrix itself and then map it the same way as you see here. At the end of the day, you can see over here in this image, the susceptibility related to the second asset on the right is much higher, right? As an analyst, when I see this and I already have this prepared, I can understand much better and I get the context I need into what is really going on in terms of, oh, I saw that this cannot happen, but it's happened, or this cannot, shouldn't happen and it's happening, stuff like that. It helps you correlate data at the end of the day, is what I'm trying to say. Trying to get the context of, I'm prepared, or I know what security gaps to fill. This is still the preparation phase, right? Now, the important thing to keep in mind, especially while creating something like this, a matrix like this, is it has to be defined for your environment a little bit. What I mean by that is different organizations have different ways in which they have set up their environments and the way, and they're in different industries also. So threat groups targeting them tend to vary. Not necessarily that a threat group sticks to an industry. It could move, but typically you see certain patterns. Now, the important thing over here to keep in mind is that the scoring is based on how you see it, not so much of this is a standard scoring and this is what is ideal. It's dependent environment to environment over, I would say, because there's always that risk. If you were going to take a technique and score it a certain way in your environment where insider threats are common, but for somebody else, it's going to be scored in a way where external threats are more common, it can cause confusion over there. So score it as you like. And it's a continuous improvement process. Like the IR process, you take the lessons you've learned at the recovery phase and bring them back up into the chart and keep updating it. At this point, I just want to ask a quick poll of just to try and get an understanding of how many of y'all have something like this or something similar. So I request you to kindly just take a minute and go ahead and vote. Cool. So as you can see from the poll results, it shows many of y'all do not have something like this. And I think it's a great thing to do. It's a great first step. We have the MITRE matrix now. Create something like this. You get a better understanding of what techniques and attack vectors you're susceptible to. Let's go ahead. Let's move on. Detect. Now, the reason I bring up detect is not because I'm here to talk about detections. We did that in the first part of the series. It's primarily to talk about the next step in that IR process. You're prepared for it, and now something happens. What do you want to have at that point that puts you in a position? What are the key features on a higher upper level that you want to have that gives you the opportunity, firstly, to be able to respond to what is going on, right? So you want your detection generally to be contextualized. You want it to be high fidelity in terms of we have been improving and tuning our environment, so this is probably not a false positive. That's the ideal situation you want to be in. And it should leave you in a process where you're ready to act. So think of it as a process where I got an alert. I want to understand certain factors. Maybe your top 10 questions itself. What user, what machines, what process, what communications, what modules were loaded, what does the hash look like, what does the signature look like? All of that should be added to give you that context. Is this across multiple machines? That context should be given too. Is it jumping between machines? All those sort of things are what you want to have, and then you want to be in a situation where you're looking at it and you can say, this is not a false positive, this is a true positive, and I want to act right now, so give me my easy one-click button. So let's go into that ready to act phase, right? Because you detected something, now you want to perform some action. Typical things I would say you want to look at, and most tools today actually support these functions in some way or the other, either through an easy click or through the API, is just to maybe kill the process, delete any associated artifacts, services, registry entries, users created, persistence techniques, basically. Contain the malware, so you want to maybe quarantine it out, use it later in forensics. Contain the whole event itself by containing it to those machines that are involved in the incident. And at the end of it, you want to blacklist this and mark it for prevention, probably even better, I would say, on the fly. Because consider a scenario, you have a phishing document in your environment and one user opened it and you're seeing it's bad. Before it gets to the other user, you want to blacklist it. So that's the idea of I want to mark it for prevention right off the bat. Now, I'm quickly going to dive into our Cyber Reason console to show you a little bit of what that looks like from our end and our side of things. Let's quickly dive in here and go into the first alert I have over here. So, for example, and I'm sure some of y'all who have attended this talk before have seen much of this information before, we give you essentially the important questions. So I know 2 machines, 2 users, the cause, connections, the timeline associated with it, any suspicions that are associated with it, you know, to say this was the behavior that made us believe it was bad. But the more fun stuff in terms of the ready to act side of things is how you can isolate machines right off the bat over here. I know these 2 guys have caused the problem. I just want to isolate it. Or you want to remote shell back into that machine. You just want to go create a shell and perform actions, you know. Or you just want to go ahead and perform different kind of response options in terms of I want to kill the process, I want to delete registries, quarantine files. Now, one thing I'd like to highlight over here is the remote shell aspect of things, and this is kind of important. The one thing you want to ensure, and I've seen this implemented a bad way in many places, is that you want to ensure that your remote shell is not going to cause more vulnerabilities. Remember, if you were able to pop shells and behave a certain way, and then attacker recognizes that, they can exploit it, it could probably cause more damage. So let's go back over here into the ready to act aspect and move on from that. So you detected something, you want your tool to set you up in a position based on what you detected to perform these activities. What do you do next? You start analyzing. First step, you start looking at the data and trying to say, what can tell me what is the extent of this attack? How can I understand how widespread is this across my environment and what artifacts are associated with it? Basically trying to put you in a phase where you're trying to first analyze all the data and you then want to limit it and then eventually take complete control. So when you think about those aspects of things, you can see I've brought up hunt over here. Now, hunting can be of 2 kinds, proactive, where you don't have an incident, or responsive, right? When you have an incident and you're like, I want to have a tool, or I want to use my SIM to pivot through data fast so that I can then sit and analyze and say, this is what I want to do next. So keeping that side of things in mind, I just want to quickly mention a few things over here related to the analyze, limit, and neutralize. Firstly, the one thing I always recommend and the way I look at the hunting aspect of things is that you want to think like a hacker. You're dealing with an incident. You want to think about, firstly, the advantage you have is that you know your environment well. Considering you've done your threat matrix, for example, you'll know exactly that this is possible, this is not possible. And think like an attacker. Think of how you would obfuscate the different things you would do and how you would move around that would tell you, okay, this is probably what he could do. Let's check step 1, 2, 3. These are the 3 options I think he could have exercised. So then you need your SIM or your EDR tool to be able to pivot you through that data really quickly. Create data flow diagrams. Try to draw it out. Map the whole attack as much as you can. You know, many tools now actually support attack trees where you can see step by step of process interaction between machines and all of that. Great idea. Tools, obviously tools. I say that again because it's all about that preparation. It's important to say that even though this might be a rarely used tool, I still want to have the capability to access it as soon as possible in case of an incident. So keeping this theme in mind of analyzing data, I want to show you a little bit of how I analyze, say, an incident I come across, for example, and how you should structure not only your querying in your SIM, but also in your EDR in a manner that you're able to ask these interesting questions on the fly. So I'm pivoting back over here into my inbox, and I'm going to start with a very simple question. My first question is going to be, just give me all processes, for example, and show me all the suspicions involved with those processes so far. So I know there are 25 over here different TTPs that could have possibly been used to affect my situation. Just gonna zoom this in a little bit. You can see the different TTPs over here that I know that the environment has seen. Great place to start, to try and understand a little bit, right? This information is useful not only during, but even during preparation phase. The next question that I want to ask is a little more interesting. I want to ask a simple question based on connections, Say I've seen, for example, malware based on threat intel sources or based on just IOCs I've seen in my own environment telling me, you know what, I want to see who all are talking to a particular country. Should be as simple as a couple of clicks. So over here you can see I just picked a connection. I said, show me everything that's connected to a remote address, and then just give it to me by country. So now I know, okay, these are all the countries that are being accessed, for example. Let's take it a step ahead, because that's not where the question ends, right? You want to see maybe the connection itself, details, so that you can pull out the port number, the addresses, the data transmitted, all that sort of stuff. Or you want to take it a step ahead and say, show me all the processes that made these connections. Here you can see it's Firefox or Chrome. So I know the browser is making these connections. It's not like a malware sitting. Might be malware in the browser, but in this case, it's only the browser. So I know what processes I can incriminate. Maybe I can go ahead and then ask another one, which is, what machines is this happening on? And then you can see over here, this sort of an analysis helps me understand now that I'm probably limited only to these 3 machines over here being the cause of being affected. So this is how you want to think about structuring your tool set, where data is aggregated from different log sources, users, networks, so you can pivot through easily and say question, 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 build up that question, and then you have all the context you need to say this is the answer I need. Maybe you want to do something a little more interesting, where you've seen floating code in your process and you want to pivot through that. Or you just want to try and understand why you got an alert. So over here, I'm just going into our malware alerts, where I have alerts for fileless malware. Picking on this one that has the pattern of malicious command, for example. You can see it as Mimikatz being used over here. Now this action, in this case, was actually prevented, as you can see. So they tried to run Mimikatz, it didn't run fine. Cool. Now, having context into AV told me so-and-so happened, and then going a step ahead to seeing the playbook or the analysis part is a little different in my opinion. AV told me invoke Mimikatz happened on this machine. Let's investigate. I'm switching from my malware context into my EDR context, where I can see process trees to understand, for example. I can see the files opened if needed. Let's close this out for a minute, because I want to talk a little bit about what that analysis looks like, right? Incident has happened. So in this case, I see it ran on a particular machine. In this case, Jeff. His machine was the machine Mimikatz ran on. What does that tell me? His credentials were properly compromised. The attacker now has his credentials. We have to go ahead and change those credentials. Lock the account out for some time, reset the password. Great. But what if other users had, for example, logged on to this machine? So let's see all the logon sessions associated with this machine, because there's a fair chance that probably there were, oops, my bad. That was not what I wanted. I wanted to see users that have logged on to this machine. And you can see over here, there were probably other users like Kelsey in this case, or Robert in this case, that also logged onto their machine previously. So that could be indicative of the fact that the credentials were cached on that box. And it's not only Jeff who has caused chaos, maybe Kelsey's and Robert's credentials are compromised too. So then I'm going to ask the next question of, okay, these users, where have they logged on, and which of the machines have they logged on to? And now you can see there are 3 different machines that I know are possible vectors for the attacker to move into. So now my remediation process is going to include looking into these machines, seeing their processes, looking at their suspicions. As you can see, this took me a matter of seconds to find out and know what I'm going to do next. This is the sort of way you want to think of your analysis phase, where you're trying to limit as much of the damage and then finally neutralize it. Now, these are, like I previously gave you questions on preparing. These are some of the things I feel are important questions to think about. Notes, probably you can keep in the back of your mind. You want to be able to see connections, users, scheduled tasks created during that particular time frame or on that machine or by that user. You want to do hunting based on product name or company name. I recently dealt with a real scenario where a vulnerability was detected primarily with Huawei devices and software of Huawei running on machines. And it was just searching by the company name saying Huawei, we figured out what all machines had that sort of that software running with that known vulnerability that had just come out in the news. So stuff like that are key elements you want to use and have the capability to use to pivot over. Let's go a little ahead over here and talk a little bit about the recovery side of things. So talking a little bit on this recovery, it's basically trying to get things back to normal, right? You want to resume business operations, you want to take those lessons learned, and then you want to use that back into your preparation phase and say, next time this happens, I want to know about it, I want to be able to have a shorter analysis process, or maybe I could even automate it, right? Technology is getting better, and there are pros and cons to automating your responses. Obviously, at the end of the day, you are dealing with a large amount of data, right? And there are a lot of variables involved. You are not really sure every time if your automation is designed or meant for that. In that sort of scenario, you want to fine tune as much as possible of even those automated response. So using playbooks, using SOARs is a great idea in my opinion. But what you want to keep in mind is that the repetitive steps that you're doing through your incident response process, you want to automate that part, right? You want to be in a position where you're managing and changing your threat hunting process so that it is learning capabilities based on your environment and gives you at least the option to fine tune things. So when we look at our platform at Cybereason, we are an automated threat hunting engine, right? We have capabilities to detect bad things going on. Those detections, as you can think, with many vendors, and because it's not custom developed to your environment, it becomes a double-edged sword where it's like, oh, I'm dealing with false positives and I'm not detecting the things that are particular to my environment. My environment is a little different from different organizations. So what we did is we decided, besides the automated detections, we also give you the capability to fine tune your detections or your false positives, right? So going back quickly into the product to just show you a little bit of what that looks like from our perspective, we let you write your custom rule. You could say process with command line so and so, and you want to fine tune it. And you want to maybe even then go ahead and pivot and say, on this particular machine only is where I want the detection. So say it's a Linux server where you're trying to block a particular exploit, or you're trying to detect a particular thing, you can assign it to that machine, right? Your crown jewels, think about those. Maybe you just want to, otherwise in the other case, you just want to whitelist something. You want to say, hey, you know what? I've seen this, might be possible in other people's environment, good detection for other environments, not for my environment. I want to fine tune it. The advantage of having something like this is primarily because now you're improving the efficiency of your automated hunting process, right? At the end of the day, you're just giving those artifacts and it's still churning through that data and making it more robust. So this is where you ideally want to be, where you're learning lessons, adding into it, and then going back to the phase where you're updating your susceptibility matrix maybe and saying, now this technique that was high risk is low risk for me. Cool. So with that, I want to bring it to an end for our SOC Talk series in general. I hope it has been useful for you. We spoke initially about detections and what an ideal detection looks like. How do you want to detect things? Then the second part of the series had Mary talk a little bit about threat hunting and how you want to have the right tools to be able to hunt. And I hope this part of response was a little useful for you. Essentially, the most important step is preparation, understanding your gaps, and then based on that, taking the accurate steps. With that, I give it back to Anna for Q&A.
Thank you, Sanat. So time for Q&A. The first question that came in was, what do you think about forensics and its role in the IR process?
So I personally categorize, in my opinion, forensics in today's world in two different aspects. First is the aspect of EDR based, which is like, the analysis and the hunting I was doing. You can refer to some aspects of that similar to forensics, because if you can save that data, then you can go back in time and look at it and say user associated, machine associated, process, command line, all those aspects. The other side of things is containing it, right, during your IR process, where you contain something, quarantine a file, pull it out, do some further analysis on it, maybe in a hard disk-based forensics, different kinds. I feel it is part of the process. It just depends on what stage you're in. That will decide what kind of forensics you want to use. If it's more of, I've contained the situation, then you can spend more time with it and do the forensics, great. But if you're in a situation where you're like, I'm under attack right now and I can't really sit and spend time reverse engineering this malware, I want to contain and analyze the issue and then reverse engineer it, that's how you want to look at it.
Great. Second question is, do you know of any other scoring techniques other than threat susceptibility matrix?
Let me think. To be honest with you, this was one of the first ones I've seen that has a matrix with like assets and understanding internal and external risk, which I think is a great way to do things. I've seen very basic formats where it's across the kill chain and it's like infection, privilege escalation, command and control, and you're scoring based off that across your assets. I think this is much better because it goes into the actual technique and you have a reference like MITRE where you can go and refer and say, hey, this is the mitigation aspect, or these are the common threat actors that use it. So correlating that data. So if you have a technique you know about, correlating it to the MITRE and saying these threat groups, then go and see how those threat groups tend to usually behave and you have their attack vectors. So I haven't come across any of this before, but I totally recommend it.
Okay, great. So that concludes our final SOC Talk. Thank you, Sanat, for hosting this. And thank you, everyone, for joining. If we didn't get to your question, we will follow up via email shortly. So thank you.
Cool. Thank you, guys. I hope it was useful.